Welcome to B2B Bites, the BigCommerce B2B podcast where we dive deep into the world of manufacturing, distribution, and wholesale. Each episode, we bring you conversations with industry leaders and pioneers who are shaping the future of B2B commerce. Today, I am thrilled to welcome Deirdre Peters, Director of Digital Experience at Boston Scientific, to the show. Prior to her role at Boston, she's had roles at Nike, Vistaprint, Staples, Titleist, and many more. Welcome to the show, Deirdre.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure and honor to be here.
Deirdre, you've had quite a career path. Let's start there. We always like to hear a little bit of background about our guests. So tell us about your journey, your career. How did you end up at Boston? What brought you into B2B commerce?
Yeah, it was a very interesting journey to where I was. If you had asked me 10 years ago if I'd be working at a medical device manufacturer, I would have said absolutely not. And what is that? So my journey began coming out of college. I wanted to do retail. And so, it was the big sexy thing to work at a big brand. And so I went to Staples, worked on both retail and .com there back in the kind of earlier days of the online shopping wave, and enjoyed that. Went to Vistaprint for a bit and ultimately to Nike, where I was and honestly didn't intend to leave. But that all changed back in 2019. A friend of mine who worked at Boston Scientific reached out and said, hey, I'm trying to start this e-commerce thing that customers are asking for, and I don't know what I'm doing. So can you come in and help? And under normal circumstances, I would have exchanged a few emails and that would have been about it. But I happen to be on maternity leave, so maybe some of the parents can relate here. But I love my children, but I was very, very bored. And so the opportunity to come in and help advise on kind of how they should start thinking about e-commerce and who, in terms of tech providers and implementation partners you might want to bring into the mix. That was exciting. So I came in baby in hand. Eventually, the conversation turned to, do you want the job? And my first reaction was absolutely not. I don't even know what you do. I don't know anything about, selling to anybody but consumers. And what eventually turned to me was I said, you have an $11 billion company and you have $0 of online sales. And I started to think, I love what I do at Nike, but we're in kind of optimization mode, and the opportunity to come start something fresh and get your fingerprints all over a solution that's going out greenfield to a customer base that's kind of really excited about it is an opportunity of a lifetime. So that's how I ended up in B2B. Not gonna lie, it was rough at first. There's definitely a difference between B2B and B2C, but you can maybe dive into that a little later. But that's kind of how I ended up in B2B, and I love it. The challenge is there. It's exciting. The customers are so appreciative, and it's just been a game changer for us here at Boston Scientific.
You kind of touched on it there, the differences between B2B and B2C, and that's kind of where I want to go initially, like that jump from a Nike to a Boston. But maybe before, because you mentioned it, 2019, $0 online. Where are you today? What has that journey been?
So we started out, we actually didn't launch until end of 2021, and that's a whole other story to unpack, but how long it takes to get started in B2B, and maybe there's opportunity for optimization there. But once we launched, it took off like wildfire. And so we have hundreds of millions going through e-commerce now today. And not only that, we actually have a good half of our user base that doesn't even purchase through the platform, but actually uses it for other things, and continues to do other order channels that have reduced our kind of administrative burden internally on our sales reps and our customer care organization beyond our wildest dreams, kind of like a benefit we didn't even see coming.
There's so much to unpack there on those ancillary benefits, right? That's something that we're always talking about, which is it is not just about online revenue growth and an online channel. It's about operational efficiency, but we'll come to that. So I want to start with that. Nike to Boston Scientific, you must have been shocked, surprised. You said you didn't necessarily want the job. Unpack that for us. What shocked and surprised you? And then I want to talk about how far we've come. But when you first made that switch, it must have been a little bit shocking to see how antiquated the B2B experience can be.
Yeah, I'll give a specific example that maybe we can all relate to, but going from a digital first organization that's kind of pioneering e-commerce and what it means to get the ease of use into the hands of consumers and provide a community and track loyalty and get consumers to come back, to go from that to nothing was shocking for sure. But I think the biggest shock of all came around technology. So I remember starting, it was July 1st of 2019. July 2nd, I asked where our product information management system was. And they were like, the what? The PIM, the Pro, the digital catalog. Then I kept getting the same answer. And in my mind, it wasn't possible not to have a PIM system. So I kept thinking, well, I have the wrong group. I'm using the wrong terminology or something along those lines. And suddenly I finally got to the point where someone handed me, they said, you know what, here's the catalog. And it was a paper bound list of tables, basically, that we would spend, almost all year getting ready. They would send it off to an agency. And then by the time it came back about 4 months later, all updated and got it out to the customer, it's 6 months out of date. And then there's product launches that aren't in there. And so you can imagine just kind of the pain of a paper catalog. But that's when I realized, oh, wow, like that's where we're starting. And so that kind of started off the journey. But that was the shock that I came into.
And I don't think that's an uncommon experience even today. I think there are lots of manufacturers, distributors out there who don't even have the product data in a digital format ready to sell online. So I'm curious, you clearly had to solve that problem to get to where you are today. So what did that journey look like to start with? That sounds like a pretty big task.
There's a couple things leading up to that. So the first thing was I was the first person in with any kind of e-commerce background. And so anytime I would identify a role that needed to be hired, they would say, well, what's that person going to do that you can't do? And it was a kind of like this, they didn't know, they hadn't done this before, and digital was kind of brand new here. So they saw it as, we hired an e-commerce team, it's you. So the funny thing that happened there was that they had purchased SAP Commerce Cloud, and they sent me the key. And so they said, here you go. Can you stand up the e-commerce store? And I'm thinking, like, I don't know how to provision environments. I don't even know what you do after that, but I certainly don't know how to do it. I'm not a systems integrator. I'm not even a tech lead who could maybe at least know what to do, even if they couldn't do it all. So that was just another example of kind of where we were. Now, when it came to product information, you're right. It was in, a catalog. It was in spreadsheets. It was in, raw data, of course, was in our ERP system. There was no enriched data, and there was nothing that really translated a raw product name to something a customer would understand. And so that's actually what took us so long, aside from COVID happening, to actually launch an e-commerce site. So I started in July 2019. We didn't launch an actual site until September of 2021. And so there was a more than 2-year time frame to figuring out how to get the right partners in, how to get all the right technology, how to digitize our product data, how to build that digitization into our process. So, you could do product data once, but then it's out of date, just like your paper catalog. So how do you build in process so that the product managers are now kind of updating this system and it becomes your source of truth? So that all took a very long time. And some of it we had to work very closely with product marketing and say, hey, what is a good description you would use to make this product sellable? Because the way a manufacturer traditionally thinks about marketing products can be kind of at a product family type of level. For e-commerce, you got to get down to the SKU. You got to convince a customer to buy a particular product. And so that distinction was not there either. So it was quite the journey. And it's easy to look back and say 2019 to 2021 now, but that was a long time, to be going through this journey.
Yeah, and I think in 2020 2025, you probably wouldn't be given as much time to get that program kicked off and live. You mentioned there selecting kind of technologies and bringing in the right people. I want to touch on both of those. How did you approach bringing in the right team? Did you bring all of the expertise in-house? Did you partner with consultants? How did you approach what it sounds like, this digital transformation? It sounds like you didn't start with a team of experts in the space. So how did you build it, get the right people on the bus, as you might say?
Yeah. So the Dee Peters of 2025 is a very different person than the Dee Peters of 2019. I'm not, and maybe this is comforting for others that are starting this journey, but looking back, I had no idea what I was doing. So what would happen is I would hire as needs arose. So it was like, okay, well, I can't do this merchandising effort, so I need a merchandiser. And I remember asking for the merchandiser and being told, we love you, but this isn't fashion. This is not shoes. And kind of trying to draw parallels to how your digital storefront needs to be taken care of just as much as a physical store or a digital storefront to a consumer who's purchasing shoes. So there was a lot of convincing that had to happen. And so because of that, I really had to have strong justification for everything that I hired. It wasn't like I could sit down and say, I need 10 roles and here's what they're all going to do. It was very much oh, wow, I can't do this anymore. I need someone to do it. So we'd start with a merchandiser, a program manager, a tech lead. And then at some point, we're like, we can't scale this internally. So we need to look outside for partnership on both the strategic front and obviously for the implementation. And so as we started to look at that model, scaling up the team internally kind of on the business process side of things, we quickly realized that kind of our IT model is to partner with implementations agency.
Gotcha. So it's a mixture of both bringing in expertise as well as partnership. How did you split the two? Is it implementation was partnering and some strategic, and then ongoing maintenance? You needed how did you determine what to?
Yeah, that's giving me way more credit than I should be given for how far down the road we were thinking. We knew we needed to stand this thing up. And when I came into the organization, they had budgeted $200,000 for a full e-commerce implementation. And I had to break it to them that we were looking at least a factor of 10, if not 20, which is what it probably ultimately cost to stand this up. And so that was not a fun conversation. That is not a conversation where you're like, by the way, you have $200,000, I need $2 to $4 million. That's a big difference, right? And so that is all happening, and I need team members, and we need to invest in technology, and now a partner. So there's a lot of pieces that were kind of moving at the time, and it was very much a get it done as it comes along, cross that bridge when you get there mentality. And so when we look at partners for implementation specifically, we were looking for someone who could be strategic and provide those development resources to get the job done. And that's not easy either. And I'll tell one more story just for kind of illustrative of, the difficulties that you kind of face when you're first standing these up. We ended up having to go with certain partners that we already had agreements with because, Boston Scientific at the time was not used to negotiating digital contracts. And so the things that we asked for in contracts with companies we work with didn't fit the digital world. And so we had to do some adapting there as well.
And I imagine there's a reasonably lengthy procurement process and to get through that's covering a lot of security, etc. And if you want to move fast, that can often be a little bit problematic and slow you down. And we work with many businesses. It's exactly the same. I've been in the same conversations where I had discussions and said, you could explore other partners that could bring in specific expertise. And the answer is, well, that will take us 9 months just to get through procurement. So no, that's not an option if we want to move fast.
About that. And, even today, we brought in a search partner. Realistically, that conversation from when we first started talking to the partner to when we launched was 2 years. I mean, we have a long sales cycle, partially because procurement does take a while, partially because your investment ask is going up against, a new medical device that could ultimately save someone's life down the road. So where they put the dollars is always a conversation that you have to have, kind of proving out, the value of the digital solution versus investment in R&D.
I'd love to double click into that. Getting stakeholder buy-in.
Yes.
Getting the right people aligned to, this is the strategy, these are the benefits, this is what it will drive, and do I have your support? And I think particularly in, at Nike, that probably was incredibly easy. Everyone understood the benefit of having a fantastic online experience, a fantastic channel experience, and could see those revenue numbers. Here you've got marketing teams, sales teams, the C-suite. Everyone has to sort of get on board. In particular, kind of sales teams can often be, it can be a little bit difficult. So how did you approach getting alignment across the business to your digital strategy and building that business case and moving that forward?
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, the business case is a big deal, but then, okay, you have your investment, you've built the technology, now what? So there's a couple pieces. How do you get to that point? The first is, we'll start at the top. Like, one thing I'll say is Boston Scientific leadership, C-suite on down, was always super supportive of advancing digitally. And that is critical, right? You can't do it without them. But that being said, again, they're sorting between, do I invest here or do I invest there? And so it's all about selling the, why e-commerce now? Why is this important to not just raise revenue, to get customer satisfaction higher, but also to our brand? How many of us have gone to a website of a company that makes a great product and the digital experience isn't good? And so you kind of start to judge the quality of the physical product too. And so I always emphasize it's important to have a digital product that's on par with the quality of your physical devices. And so ROI conversations, again, it always comes down to what's in it for you, what's in it for the C-suite, what's in it for the sales teams, et cetera. And so what I always say is 20% of what I do is kind of technology, and about 80% is change management or commercialization, as I call it, because nobody wants to hear the words change manager or that they're being change managed, right? But everyone likes to commercialize things. So my approach to any of those groups that you mentioned is always the what's in it for them, and then trying to approach everything with empathy and demonstrating value so that you can say, no matter who I have, there's something in this for them. So for example, you brought up sales teams. Many times in B2B, I've heard this a lot, there can be some resistance to digital tools in general, kind of like, that's my business. Why do you need to track it? Why do I need to put it in? You certainly deal with that in the CRM world. But even in e-commerce, there was a piece of me that was afraid they would think I was trying to take over a portion of their job. And so what we did to approach that is we said, hey, you are highly clinically trained sales reps. We bring you in for your clinical expertise, your ability to engage physicians, your ability to look out for the patient care. You don't have time for this stuff. You don't have time to be calling sales support or pulling over to the side of the road to zoom in on some PDF catalog to try to get a product code to a customer, or you might be on vacation and they're asking you to order something. And so we really approached it from why would you care about this, and what are we doing to help you? Another thing we did that I think led to a lot of our success is that not only did we have sales leadership buy-in, not only did we engage our sales training teams in how do you use this, which might sound crazy, like an e-commerce site should be intuitive, and certainly it is, but you should still know, exactly how to use it, how to get a customer up and running, et cetera. But the big differentiator for us is that we had our sales team roll it out. And so we didn't go around them. We armed them with a tool in their toolbox to go to a customer, to save the customer time, to save them time, so they could focus on what really mattered, which was clinical selling. And so that has been just an incredible methodology for us. And even today, we've looked at, accounts that were onboarded by a rep. Traditionally, in the last 3 years for us, they drive almost twice as much revenue incrementally than accounts that we just, sent out an email for them to sign up. So we know that the rep matters a lot, and using them to get it out there allows the rep to feel like they're part of the process. And the last thing I'll leave with is we involve them in the development process. We set up sales councils. They would bring their voice of rep, and they'd say what's important to them and their customers. And as we iterated on the development of it, we would bring it to them in demo. And so they became our champions in the field.
You started by saying the online experience should be as good as our products. I think that's such a good point. It sounds so obvious, but actually you put so much energy into producing an amazing, in your case, obviously, a science-led medical product. It could be anything. Any manufacturer, distributor, you put so much effort into building the best product you can. If that surface that your customer hits doesn't portray how great that product is, you could lose them. That's such a great point. And then you also said you let the sales team lead the onboarding of those customers. And I think that's a really great approach to take. And I think if you could repeat the statistic that you shared, did you say that there was repeat that statistic that you shared with regards to that was incredible.
Accounts that had a sales rep onboard them to e-commerce drive about twice the incremental revenue. So it's somewhere around 20% versus 10% that we see from our accounts that we just onboarded via email, or they heard about it from another customer, or whatever the case may be. So we know that sales rep is important in the process for many reasons, but in this particular adoption case as well.
Did you have to put any programs or incentives in place for the sales teams?
Money speaks for sure. Yes, we have utilized sales programs. I would say minimally. Back in the very early days, when we didn't know how this would go, we started with a pilot of 12 customers. And we white gloved it. I personally flew to a bunch of centers around the country, introducing them to e-commerce, getting their feedback. Our very first one in North Carolina, walked in, set her up, and the first thing she goes is, "Oh, just like Amazon." And I was like, done. Like, we were mission accomplished here. I was hoping she'd say it was just like Nike, but she didn't. But mission accomplished. She's like, "Oh, yeah, I get it. Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for the setup, and I'll just start ordering through here." So, we white gloved it. We didn't know how it would go. So having these reps involved right from the beginning, and them knowing their customer, and then me knowing the reps, that made a big difference, because I was a trusted partner. They knew I was there to make their jobs easier. And we've talked about the incremental sales we've seen, and that's been incredible. My very most aggressive model that I built back in 2019 showed 3% incremental sales. We average somewhere around 16% today. So it's just been an incredible growth driver.
Lance here. That was the end of part 1 of our discussion with Deirdre Peters from Boston Scientific. Be on the lookout for part 2 of our conversation, where we continue this deep dive into what's driving B2B commerce today.